Hi, Engineering Olympians, Mrs. Iwanski here. Today we are going to talk about distribution of resources. So, on Earth, resources are not distributed equally. So, some places have a lot of certain resources, while other places have very little of certain resources. Some places you are able to find oil, but you're not able to find fresh water. Other places are abundant in water, but lacking in minerals in the ground. And so, all different places have all different resources that you can find there. Earth's resources are not distributed evenly across the planet, and there's a couple of different factors that weigh into that we're going to talk about today. Some of those factors are the climate that exists in the place currently. So, what you might be able to grow there, or the type of weather patterns that you get there, might impact what kind of resources you have in a place. Earth's history, so what has happened there in the past, maybe the climate that was there previously, or other things that were happening in that location on Earth previously. And then geological processes, so what's taking place under the ground that we're not seeing geologically shifting of tectonic plates or the Earth's crust moving around. So we're going to take a look quick at the distribution of resources so that when you get your resources for the engineering challenge today, you understand why not all groups got the same thing. You as an individual nation are going to get a bag of resources, but it's not going to be necessarily the same resources that a different person in the class got. This is to help simulate this idea that different nations have different access to different materials and then need to make the best of the resources that they have moving forward. So, like I said, one of the things that weighs into the distribution of resources is the climate in a location. So, plants and animals require certain environmental conditions in order to grow and thrive. If those environmental conditions don't exist in the place, then those plants won't be able to grow. If we think about this in terms of food growth, Wisconsin is able to grow corn and soybeans, plants that have relatively short growing seasons, right? We plant them in spring, we harvest them in fall, and in between, we have winter, I guess. Other places have much longer growing season. If you think of the types of things that are able to grow in Florida and California, these are things that need a longer time to flower, be pollinated, and then produce the fruit or the vegetable that they are growing. This is why in different places are able to produce different kinds of food. And because of shipping, we're able to ship those all over the country and the world to kind of redistribute the resources that exist in a place. If it wasn't for shipping, we wouldn't be able to redistribute those resources, and people would be stuck with only the food that they could grow in place. In that case, I would much rather live in California where we could grow oranges and avocados as opposed to Wisconsin where I would have to eat a steady diet of corn and soybeans. Temperature and precipitation of that region also play in. Certain things, in order to grow, need lots of water or need very dry conditions or sandy soils. And so those types of things also weigh in with the climate of the place. Plants and animals are found in the region where the temperatures are just right. These things have shifted around over time to make sure that they're growing in a place that appeals to their needs as a plant or an animal, which is typically a certain temperature range and precipitation range. The next thing that weighs into the distribution of resources is Earth's history. So, climate is what's happening in that place right now. Earth's history is everything that came before right now in a given location. Some of Earth's resources, particularly fossil fuels, so oil, natural gas, coal, are dependent on the remains of ancient plants and animals breaking down over time. If a location didn't have an abundance of plants previously, it's going to be very hard to find a fossil fuel there because they won't be very deep in the soil under pressure and heat, turning into those resources. Where these plants and animals lived in the past are going to determine where those resources are found today. And so when we look at a map in a little bit about where those natural resources are found, um, it gives us kind of a glimpse into what the world used to look like. Where did the rainforest used to be? Where did the swamps used to be? Where were these areas of heavy plant and animal life previously? Because that's where we're finding these reserves of oil and other natural resources, particularly fossil fuels, today. The last thing that weighs into it is going to be geological processes. So many metals and minerals are found where plates are shifting, either going under one another or being created, like in a volcano where things are being pushed up and out of the earth. To tectonic plates, here's one sublimating under the other one. This is pushing up on top, making a mountain ridge. And then, like I said, also where the lava would be coming up, either creating new islands or creating landmass above the earth. So we're going to take a look at 5 important resources today and kind of the distribution of them on our planet. Those are going to be fertile soil. So fertile soil is important to grow things, to have a healthy agricultural area of our world. You would need fertile soil, so soil that's going to support a lot of plant life and growth. Biodiversity just means that lots of different things are able to grow there. So in some habitats, it's a very specific set of plants and animals that can grow there. In other places, we get a lot of biodiversity. We're going to find huge quantities of different animals, different plant life. So we'll take a look at where that's happening. Fossil fuels, uranium, and then other metals and minerals. All right, so fertile soil, like I said, humans depend on fertile soil for farming. We depend on farming for our food. So without fertile soil, we can't have agriculture. Without agriculture, we are very, very hungry. So fertile soil is considered a natural resource that is sought after, right? People want to live where there's fertile soil so their food source can be closer to where it is that they're living. They get better quality foods. Fertile soil is most often found in temperate climates. In temperate climates, you're not going to have either extreme. So you don't have super, super, super hot weather and you don't have super, super, super cold weather. It's relatively mild. Precipitation is relatively high, so we're getting a good amount of rainfall to support the photosynthesis process and the creation of plant life. Temperate climates are most often kind of in the middle latitudes, so not the extreme polar latitudes, but kind of those mid-range latitudes. We live in a temperate climate, so it gets cold in winter and it gets hot in summer, but not hot, 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 crazy burning hot, and not freezing cold. We need to only stay inside for all of winter. Some regions at lower latitudes have ideal climates for fertile soil as well, but the wind and ocean currents are what kind of drives that. And so some areas of those lower latitudes are going to have the fertile soil, but it's typically going to be kind of along those coastal areas where you're getting the right currents of ocean air and ocean water, bringing those rainfalls up along those coasts. So the most fertile soil on Earth is found in the United States. We're considered to be a rich country in terms of the natural resource of fertile soil. There's also a good amount in Europe, and then India and China also have a good amount of fertile soil. You can see that it's kind of this mid-band going across, not so much at the extremes along the middle. In Africa, we have kind of an outlier here that's almost at the equator, and that's where we talk about those ocean currents developing those more fertile soil areas. All right, biodiversity is simply the diversity of life. We look at the different types of plants and animals that are in a place and how many of those different things there are. Biodiversity is one of Earth's greatest natural resources for a couple of reasons. First of all, it maintains an equilibrium in our world. So we want an equilibrium where things balance out, where the amount of different gases being made and put in the atmosphere, different amounts of plant life is able to support the different amount of animal life. And so when you have good biodiversity, you are able to reach this equilibrium. A good example of this is wolves were extinct, but if I endangered, not extinct, if I reintroduce wolves to an area and don't have the proper food supply for them, the wolves, I will feel great about the fact that I've reintroduced an endangered animal, but when the food supply runs out in that area, the wolves will also die off. So I need to make sure that I reintroduce endangered species in a level that their environments can keep up by making sure they have proper food supplies and habitats for them to live in. It's also a source for New medications or medicines are oftentimes derived from some of the plants that we find, particularly in the rainforest, which is going to be our area of greatest biodiversity on our planet. It promotes water and soil quality, so these systems where the water is cycling through the plants, through the animals, and back into the earth promotes good, healthy, clean water and soil quality. And then biodiversity is richest in, like I said, those tropical rainforests. So as we look particularly in South America, there's also pockets of it in Africa, and then Southeast Asia, as we look at a lot of those island nations being more tropical or rainforest like in nature. All right, next one is fossil fuels. Our world right now relies heavily on fossil fuels, the burning of coal, oil, and natural gas to heat things, to create electricity, to run our automobiles is all part of this fossil fuel overarching umbrella category. Fossil fuels are found deep within the earth. So, like I said earlier, they accumulate in large pools or reserves when previous biomass breaks down over time. That's why it's called fossil fuels. They're really, 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 really old. Coal reserves are found where swamps used to be. So when we find huge settlements of coal, we can determine that previously in Earth's history, swamps were there. Oil reserves are found where marine organisms were buried. So we can determine oil is found in previous watery environments. And then natural gas reserves are found near oil reserves. And so we found this correlation between when you find oil, kind of a radius that you typically find natural gas within as well. When we talk about coal reserves, United States, Russia, and China have some of the largest coal reserves in the world. Largest oil reserves, you hear a lot about the oil in the Middle East. And then there are also some large oil reserves up in Canada as well as Mexico. So if you've heard about the Canadian pipeline, trying to get some of that oil from Canada down into the United States, it's because there's large oil reserves up there in that area. Natural gas reserves are then found kind of in adjacent places. And so we have the Middle East, the United States, and then China. Oops, let me go back. So to wrap up fossil fuels, these places that they're found are, this is seen as a benefit, one, because we don't have to import them, right? So if we are able to mine our own coal, then we don't have to import coal from others. However, because it's a finite resource, not everybody has it, it's also a cost benefit to our country, right? We're able to sell it, export it, and make money off of this, or people living in a place are able to sell it and make money off of it. And so you hear a lot about fossil fuels and costs of fossil fuels because it is a finite resource, right? These natural resources, there isn't this huge abundance of them. So we need to kind of keep track of where they are and who has them and how much they're going for, what the going rate of any of them are. Speaking of things that people are curious about the going rate of, uranium is interesting because it is considered a natural resource, particularly because it's important to nuclear power. So uranium atoms are split apart in a process called fission, and this releases huge amounts of energy. So when we talk about ways to get energy, you could burn fossil fuels, you could also make nuclear power plants, which when you split uranium, you get these huge amounts of energy. You also hear about uranium in terms of making nuclear weapons, right? So we can talk about the positives of uranium, which could potentially be nuclear energy, which wouldn't involve us burning fossil fuels. But we could also talk about the dangers of finding uranium reserves, which would be giving people access to things that they can make super powerful weapons out of. Whoops. Okay, now that I got my slides back. So uranium in the largest reserves are found in Australia, which is an interesting thing in and of itself because it's an island floating out there on its own. But that's where the largest reserves of uranium are found. They can also be found in Kazakhstan, which is in the Middle East, Russia, and then Canada also has a good supply of uranium. You can see that other places on the planet have uranium as well. I just highlighted some of the largest stockpiles of uranium naturally found, not necessarily in terms of which countries have imported uranium into them, but naturally where could we find uranium. And then last one is metals and minerals. So similar to our other natural resources, metals and minerals come with their own unique reasons that people would want them, both for beauty, like in diamonds, for value, holding value, like in gold. People have gold reserves because that's a agreed upon standard of wealth or value, whereas other currencies fluctuate more so up and down. Most of Earth's minerals are, like I said, found near those plate boundaries. So where either one plate is going under another, the plates are crashing together, or the plates are pushing up into these other forms. Gold and diamonds are two of the most desired substances on Earth for the reasons I said, jewelry, but also kind of an agreed upon standard value for those things. Gold is a precious metal. It's often found near faults and inactive volcanoes, so places where previously that Earth was being pushed up and out of the ground, but it's not currently being pushed up and out of the ground. And then diamonds are a mineral. They're found near ancient volcanoes, specifically in the old volcanic pipes that carried the magma. So if we think about a volcano, the magma is coming out both at the top, but oftentimes there's branches coming out of the volcano where the lava is also pushing out. At those places, you get really high pressure, and that seems to be where they find these diamonds. So places with large gold deposits, the United States, and then Germany, or Europe, but specifically Germany seems to have quite a bit of gold. And then when we talk about diamond deposits, Australia, Africa, particularly the southern part of Africa, or South Africa, if you go all the way to the bottom of that continent. All right, so your assignment for today is kind of twofold. First of all, based on the distribution of resources we discussed, now where would you ideally place your country? So last time when you were working on your map, or earlier in this class when you were working on your map, you kind of randomly picked a country location based on where it is that you thought you wanted it to be. Now knowing how natural resources are distributed, I want you to think about and move your little dot. Let me get on this. So you're going to once again move your little dot to where you would want your country to be. Your dot should be over here. Sorry guys, my smartboard touch isn't working tonight. So here's your dot. Okay. So you're going to move your dot over to where you would now want your country to be based on where you believe the ideal location is to make sure that you have a good amount of natural resources. The slides I just went through are up above here, so if you want to review any of the maps to see, and there's also a key down here to help you remember where each of those things are. On the last slide of that presentation, you're going to choose one of the prompts to the left and then complete your work. So here are your 3 options for prompts that you can complete. You could summarize what you learned from today's lesson about natural resources in 5 sentences or more. You can always write more, but you are not allowed to write less. So think about what you learned as we went through those, review the slides, and then you can go ahead and write 5 sentences. You could create a graphic organizer to summarize the information you learned. A graphic organizer could be something like a Venn diagram. It could be something like a web, something more visual in nature to kind of go through what it is that you learned. Or you could draw a picture or a diagram to summarize what you learned. If you choose the last one, just make sure that it is clear to me what the picture or diagram is that I'm looking at. You're not simply putting a picture of a gold bar and saying, I learned about gold, there's a picture of gold. If you're choosing this one, it should be clear to me kind of how it's highlighting some of the work that you learned today. So that's task number 1, is finishing up these slides. They are posted in the Google Classroom under the natural resource scarcity lesson. Most of the 20 slides are things I just went through. The last 2 are going to be the work that you need to do. The other part of your work today is your resource inventory and allocation. During class today, you will need to grab one of these bags. The bags are all randomly packed. So they have similar materials in them, but you can see even in looking at these 2, they have different quantities, and sometimes bags are missing things completely. Like I just talked about, in different places on our country or in our world are different resources. So today you're going to find out what kind of resources you have in your country. You will randomly pick a bag. You will write your name on that bag. in a permanent marker because this is now your resource allocation for the remainder of this course. So you will use this over the next however many weeks we have left to build any of the projects for the Engineering Olympics. Once you pick your bag and write your name, you then need to fill in the total amount allotted column. So in this column, you need to fill in what it is that you got in your bag. You'll count up things like large popsicle sticks and medium popsicle sticks and fill in a quantity. Anything highlighted in yellow is because you actually need to figure out the square inches of that material you got. Remember nope, I don't have markers today either, guys, sorry. Remember for figuring out area, you're simply measuring the length and you're multiplying by the width. There are rulers on the far, far back counter of the classroom opposite of the smartboard. So all the way on the other side of the room. So you will need to add up, for example, if I have a piece of paper, figure out the area of that piece of paper, and that is what goes in this cell right here. Once you have your material allocation filled out and your natural resource lesson done, you can submit those to me, and then your bag should go in the bin. If you are, if you're my Thursday class, it'll go in the black bin. If you're my Friday class, it'll go in the silver bin, just so that we can keep them separate throughout the course of our work. All right, I think that does it. I think this is the longest lesson that I teach throughout the course of this class. The remainder of the lessons for this unit or for this quarter will be much, much shorter in length. But thanks for sticking with me on natural resources today. I think it's a really important topic to talk about and to just be aware of as we look at the world around us and how we, as consumers, make choices about what we use. Most of our resources are not unlimited, and so making sure that we kind of keep that in the back of our head as we use things, and then we'll practice doing that in our Engineering Olympics, kind of keeping that in our head as we choose what to use for each of our challenges. All right, slide 19 and 20, and then your material allocation. That'll wrap it up for this week, and then next week we will launch into our challenges. Good luck, be nice to the sub. See you next week, hopefully.